Hey, what's up guys? Note Investor here. So I want to show you guys some technical analysis as to why I believe we will see a pretty good dip in Bitcoin near term, but this will set up a longer term gain over the next weeks, maybe month or so. But intermediate, longer term, I am still very much a bull. I believe Bitcoin's going higher, but there's a pattern I'm watching here. And for those of you that are relatively new to technical analysis, bear with me. I'm going to try to show you guys my thought process here and how I see this playing out. But I also want to talk about the Bitcoin dominance chart. And if you got my newsletter yesterday, I mentioned that a little bit and where I see that going. The summary is I think the Bitcoin dominance will continue to grow, and I'll show you what I'm looking at there. But first off, let's do a price analysis of Bitcoin. So we have been in a very steady climb over the last week since bottoming out around 9,400, and it's been very nice, very steady. The daily chart has continued to look very well, and here we are in the last day approaching this prior high that we made around 11.7, 11.8, and I've been talking about that as a next major resistance point to be watching as the price of Bitcoin approach that. So that's the level I've been watching. I've started to tighten up the stops here as we approach that. And here today I started noticing another picture. So as the prices begin to rise, I always look at RSI, I look for divergences. I start paying attention to those high volume reversals near the top, just because it makes sense that you're going to see a little bit of pausing, maybe some profit taking as we begin to approach a major resistance point. Doesn't mean it necessarily crashes, but at best we see a little bit of a pause there. Could we just shoot right through and then reverse? That happens a lot. But what I'm watching here is another pattern I've been seeing form over the last day or so, and that is the potential rising wedge pattern. And if you're familiar with this, this is a bearish pattern that tends to break lower when it resolves itself. And you know, there's a little bit of subjectivity. You can go based off the candle bodies, you can go based off the wicks, but the general pattern is certainly there, and it's starting to culminate here at the top of this little range near the resistance. I'm also looking at the RSI. The RSI has hit near the top, and even if it does break through, we're starting to run out of a little bit of steam here as it approaches this high, so got to pay attention to that. And so this rising wedge pattern, how does it play out? So it gets narrower and narrower as it rises, and then they tend to break below this lower trend line and break to the downside. You can do a measured move on this and see how far down that would break. And so I'm going to be a little conservative here and not go with the widest part and say, let's say we go from there to there. Then you take that and you pull that out to wherever you think it'll break, whether it's here or up here. And let's say we continue higher a little bit longer, and we go up to about 11.5 or 11.6 or something and break from there. And look at where that arrow is pointing to, 10,300. And does that make sense? Well, that just happens to be a major support zone that we saw a couple of days ago. The other major support zone that I'm looking at, or not major, but the near-term support, is this little area here right around that 11.8 where we dipped, found some support, and went higher. And so there's 2 points that I'm looking at, right? If we break, we can either hit that 11.8 here near term, or we go lower and we hit 11.3, 11.4 in that zone. Now there's another way to confirm this pattern. So you can say, all right, let's do a fib analysis on this. And if we go from the low to where we think it'll top, let's say it tops out again around that 11.6 or so, then from that point down, look at how that lines up. That first support zone is at the first key Fibonacci ratio at the 382 level, right at 10,756. That's pretty close to that 10.8. The next key Fibonacci ratio is the 618, and that is, I know it's hard to read here, 10,228. So the 10.3, 10.2. So that also confirms what I'm watching here on this potential rising wedge pattern. Now what happens next? Does this create a big double top? Does this create a bearish picture? What happens if we drop all the way to 10.2? So let's zoom out a little bit, because I actually would not mind this playing out one bit, because in the bigger picture, this sets up a very nice, very bullish pattern. And so let me clear this fib ratio here. I'll leave the lines there so that we can see how this plays out. But if we zoom out to the daily chart, do you see the pattern that is potentially forming on this daily chart? That is the cup and handle. And so after a big rise like the one we saw, we're seeing this cup base starting to form here. And if we see that pullback that I'm looking for down to 10.3, 10.4 around there, that would set up a very nice handle on this cup and base pattern. And when you see that on a longer term time frame like a daily chart, that is very bullish, much stronger of a pattern than when they show up on the 1 hour charts or those shorter term time frames. Now, I know everybody was looking for this inverted head and shoulders, and I thought that was certainly valid, but funny thing is about technical analysis, when everybody wants a particular chart to play out, it usually doesn't. But we could also see that big inverted head and shoulder with the two shoulders that I was talking about. But what I'm looking at more specifically is this cup and handle playing out. And so that actually looks very bullish, because the way the cup and handles generally work is you get this first high, which was right around that 11.8. And they tend to pull back generally 20 to 30% after a big rally. And so if we look at the top down to the low, that was a 21, 22% move. And then they rally, but they don't rally as high as the first time. The sellers start to show up prior to that peak. That's exactly what we're seeing play out here right now. And usually the handle will come in and it's no more than about halfway deep into the cup. So, you know, 10, 15%, 12% around there. And so if we take the low that I'm looking at this point, that's a 10% dip. If it tops here, if it goes a little higher, let's say 10.7, 10.6, then that's a potential 12% dip. And it could even go a little bit lower and still be just fine. But nonetheless, the measurements are starting to play out. So you never know how it ultimately plays out. But when you do technical analysis, you want to try to anticipate and project what the next move may be. And that's where this comes in very handy, because then you have a plan. You have a way to react. You're not overreactive, and you're not seeing the first sign of selling and thinking, oh, this is it, it's going to crash, because now you have some targets and some projections to look at. So what happens if this cup and handle plays out? So the next way to do it is you say, okay, this thing's going to pull back, give us a little bit of a handle. Then we anticipate that it'll find a low, a higher low above 10K. And at that point, another rally should begin. And so if you do a measured move on the cup and handle, you take that from the depth of the cup to the high of the second rally, and you project that out upon breakout. And let's say it breaks out there, then you're looking at 13.6, maybe closer to 14K on the move following the handle. Now, I've been talking about we're going to see 13K in March, possibly 15K, but I still believe Bitcoin is going to go higher in March. I think 13K is certainly in the cards. And so if we get this handle, this pullback, then that may offer up a good secondary entry point, in my opinion. So that's the level I'm looking at, folks. That's what I'm seeing in the charts today. I just wanted to give you guys some of that analysis, some of my thought process. The daily picture, the all-around big picture still looks very good. The RSI is healthy. There's still a lot of room to go on the upside before the daily chart is anywhere near being overbought. The MACDs are confirming. This volume on this latest 3 days has been declining a little bit, so it would make sense to see a little bit of selling show up. But on the downside, those are the levels I'm looking at. Now, big picture. Let's go to this coin market cap here, dominance chart. I mentioned this on my newsletter over the last day or so. Now, we've seen in history, right, Bitcoin was very high in the past, above 80%, and then early last year when the alts started their mega rally, Bitcoin dominance just fell sharply all the way down to the mid 30s before rallying back up to around 60%. Then we peaked ultimately at around 65% or so on the dominance before the big pullback in December and January, and that was the last huge altcoin rally that we saw. Now we're seeing something similar. Let me go to the yearly, and you can tell here, I mean, the alts have been lagging. Let me switch the chart here to stacked. It's a little bit easier to see. So you got to keep in mind, at this time last year, Bitcoin dominance was still 84%. So we've come a long ways in terms of the altcoin market, and that initially was led predominantly by Ethereum, and then we saw Ripple come into the picture, and some of the other bigger names really start showing up there. And we had the last big dip here on Bitcoin between December and January, where you see the alt market predominantly leading the pack here, gaining a lot of ground versus Bitcoin. And in early January, that topped out. And since then, it's pretty much been the slow, steady decline in the altcoin market versus BTC. So Bitcoin continues to be the place to be. I am heavyweight Bitcoin at the moment. I still do hold alts, but predominantly been Bitcoin. And as far as my trading goes, it's mostly been trading BTC, and there's been some good small alt trades, but the alts have been tough trades nonetheless. Usually they're smaller, they're shorter, quicker gains, but we're still seeing some names. There's always going to be names that are outperforming. We saw Monero have a pretty good run over the last day. We've seen a handful of other names, but overall, the altcoin market continues to drift lower versus BTC. Now, how low does it go? At this point, the dominance is back up to around 41, 42%. I believe this will continue to climb. Now, I don't think we're going to go back as high as we did here, around 64, 65%. I think the dominance in Bitcoin will peak out a little bit lower this time, as it has continued to do so over the last year. Every rise gets a little bit shorter, a little shallower, and the alts continue to mature, and the bigger names continue to grow and gain a little bit more traction and market share versus Bitcoin. And so I expect that to continue to play out. And so the number I'm looking at is the 50%, maybe the low 50s, 51, 53% in terms of where the dominance caps out for Bitcoin this go around. How long that takes to play out is anyone's guess. My educated guess projection right now at this point is by April we'll start to see that number being reached. So does it mean stay away from alts completely? Until then, I'm not going to do that. I'm always looking at the alts, because what tends to happen is before we reach the peak in the Bitcoin dominance, several of the alts really start to take off well before then. And this chart represents predominantly the big cap names. You can see the top 10 are listed here, and this white section at the bottom, this others, represents the rest of the market, which at this point is about less than 20% of the total cryptocurrency market cap. Now, if you go to the coin market cap charts, you can see how it's pretty much been stale. I mean, you can see the alts are just sitting tight, pretty much flat, not a lot of action happening here. You're seeing Bitcoin rise, and that's why the dominance continues to grow. If you look at the total coin market cap here, it has drifted slightly higher, but again, not huge. And so a lot of the rotation is happening out of alts and into BTC, and I think we'll continue to see that play out here. There's the longer term picture for the last couple of months, pretty much a flat total currency market cap at this point, and there's just some shifting going on between the two, BTC and a lot of these other alts. So that's where we're at, folks. I just wanted to give you guys that quick update. I appreciate you watching. It's going to be an interesting next couple of days in the Bitcoin world, and I'll keep you guys posted. Until next time, take care, everyone.